Good evening and welcome to tonight's Shir, Motzei Shabbos Vo'ero, dedicating the Shir to Zchus Tinek ben Malka Miriam Shichya. Should be able to have his bris soon, and all other kinderlach, as Hashem, who are waiting for their bris, should be able to have their bris b'ita bismano, and Vatech, everyone who needs a refuah shlema should be given a refuah shlema b'korev. Let's go into our questions. Okay, now, just a thought. There is an idea that neighbors have an influence on one another. That's why we see with Koirach, etc. So we call it Tev Latzadik, Tev L'Shcheinoi, and the opposite. How does it work? Does it work that because they're neighbors, therefore they have an influence on one another? Or was it possibly that because they have a similar nature, therefore they gravitate to have to live in the same area? That the fact that they've moved B'Shcheinus is actually because subconsciously they've got some similar mindset, etc. There is such an approach, like a Shova, etc. Anyway, why am I saying this? People listening to this here, and some of them are going to be listening to a recording, and probably some of you also listen to other podcasts too. I just think if your mindset listening to this one, you might be listening to other podcasts too. And recently, on the Yeshiva headlines, there has been, which is produced in the United States, there was a whole discussion about careers for women, and what's the Jewish perspective about this. And B'Hashkocha Protis, just this, for this Shabbos, the Sikha, which is published by Vad Hanochas Belahag for every Shabbos. So for the issue for this week has got X letters, as they have been doing the last 10 years. At the back of the Sikha, there's also several letters that haven't been published before. So there's about 5 letters in this week's issue which relate to this topic. I'd like to share them with you, although no one has asked me the question, but it's interesting, it's topical and right, so valuable stuff. So here we go. Someone had asked the Rebbe, a woman had asked the Rebbe about going into some kind of career. I'm not sure, it doesn't say what. So the Rebbe writes the following: Iker Tafkid Bas Yisrael Nusua. The primary function, mission of a married Jewish daughter, Liyos Akeres Habayis Kedeboy, to be the mainstay of the home, as it should be. Hainu and Holas Habayis Bichlal, the management of the house overall. B'miyuchad Gidul v'chinuch hayalodim, especially the bringing up and educating the children. Zeh matim gamkein, this also corresponds to Mashanemar, the posuk in Mishlei, which we say every Friday night, Kol Kvudo Bas Melech Pnimo. The glory of the daughter of the king is Pnimo, is inside. Now, what about working out of the house then? So the Rebbe puts 3 points here. With difficulty was negotiated, so was allowed, permitted to have a vocation outside the home, and with several points. Well, number one, when it's a vocation of chinuch, of education, of Yiddish children, because women have a motherly touch, which for children, and therefore their influence is greater and deeper. So that's the first point. When there's a call for chinuch, it doesn't actually go into whether it's girls or boys, but when there's a need for chinuch, okay, so that's where a woman's obviously much more suited, depending on the age, etc. Second point, b'chdei lifter habal ha'oisik b'hasmoda b'limud ha'Torah, v'dagas parnosa ha'muchrachas. Or alternatively, when there's a husband, when her husband is engaging in Torah diligently, so to relieve him of the worries of essential parnosa for the essentials, so she will work so that he should be able to continue steiging, etc. Okay. Third possibility, when the husband's efforts for providing for his family, notwithstanding his efforts is in this, and it is the husband's duty, as it says, we have in the Pasuk that the husband has a duty to provide his wife food, clothing, etc. But if the husband's earnings are not adequate, is not enough, therefore he has the need for his wife's assistance to provide for the house. So this first chinuch. Secondly, if the husband is sitting and learning intense, assiduous manner, and the third one was to supplement the income of the home. Then the Rebbe finishes off. He says, "Hayesh b'nidain shalohem echad mimatzavim hanal." You, the questioner, do any of these three categories fit in your situation? It looks like that wasn't that pressure. She wanted to go to work, but not because there was a shortage of money, etc. Moving sheyadua mashanemar eishes chayil goimer sadin asasova timker goimer. It's known that also in Eishes Chayil, it lists there that the woman had manufactured a sheet and she sells it. In other words, that she does do some kind of industry to bring in income. It certainly does not contradict the above conditions which are drawn from Shulchan Aruch. It doesn't give a specific source, perhaps in the printed one they do have. So there seems to be discouraging if there's not a need. Then we have here a second letter, also in the same kuntras, and the Rebbe says, "I thank you for your letter, and you're asking for a bracha chavtes macheshvan." I'll read it by the Tzion. Bichlal tafkid harishoni dechol aim, ativi harishoni dechol aim. The natural priority for every mother, hareza gidul v'chinuch yoladeho, is bringing up and educating her children, koilel in brackets hanholas abayis, including the management of the home. End of brackets. When there is missing in this fulfilling this primary role, this inner role, this is confusing to the tranquility of the person, especially when they are very young children. Then he adds, Hayesh mokim was man the tafkid tofel. Does it make sense to give the time for not a primary role, but a secondary role? In other words, I guess that would mean part-time. Totally b'matzav ha'individuali shel ha'mishpocha. This depends on the personal, that family situation. V'reiv ha'top ha'omim lo b'ter tafkid. Not as a position, as being, I guess, a management position. As you see in the notes, that this woman had been, in the notes they say that she had been working as a management of events in one of the hotels in her city. And she's asking, after she gives birth to her third child, should she go back to being a manager of events in the hotel, or should she drop that? So coming back to the main letter, so the Rebbe is saying, not as a, I guess, primary official, yes, if there is a need to kind of have a bit of a variety of the day, during the day. To ease up from the tension of just being focused on one thing the whole day. Okay, for a bit of variety. So the Rebbe seems to also. So this is quite interesting because in addition to the three circumstances mentioned earlier, here the Rebbe also says about having a part-time job to give a bit of variety to ease up on tension. So the Rebbe goes along with that also. So I just wanted to share that. And okay, let's move on. Obviously, these are general chlolim and the general guidance, and each person will have to make decisions, seek guidance for their own situation. Let's move on. So I was asked this week about the minhag in Chabad to avoid not to give that Chosin does not give the Kala an engagement ring. So let's take a look. And this is a letter of the Rebbe published in the Kutasichus. This is I took it from Shulchan Menachem. Metamim Muvonim, for obvious reasons, Kadai Ladaiti, it is appropriate, in my opinion, Shebamatonis Lakala Lefnei Kiddushin, the gifts given to a bride before the actual wedding, Loiti Atabas. There should not be a ring. Whether it's going to be in my name or not, but it should become, the Rebbe, it does see that this is something not only for Chabad, this is something for the broader Jewish community to avoid this minhag of giving an engagement ring. Let's go to this, understand the concept of Kiddushin. Traditionally, back in the times of the Mishnah, even later, a man and woman would agree to get married, so he would give her Kiddushin. That would be a commitment on his part and on her part that they're going to get married. They do not live together yet. They don't move in as a husband and wife. It's a commitment. Meanwhile, he will put aside the money, prepare a house. She will put together whatever she needs to set up home. And then after several months, a year, whatever it may be, they will then, should we say, consummate this engagement and they will get married. So really, if you think about the translation of the word engagement, if a young lady walks into work one day and she's got a ring on her finger, a diamond ring, what does it say? It says that she's made a commitment. She's made a commitment to a particular man. And so it does reflect the concept of Kiddushin very, very close. Also, the Rebbe took exception to what in contemporary Hebrew, including amongst Haredi circles, using the word for engagement, in so-and-so and so-and-so, ma'orasim. They're using the word erusin, which is actually the word synonymous with Kiddushin. And that shouldn't be done, because it's not, chas v'sholem, if it doesn't work out, we're not talking about a Kiddushin, we're talking here about an agreement to get married, but not in the rigid sense of Kiddushin. In the note here, there's a quote from the Sichos from Tovshin Mem Aleph. Obviously, the Chosin doesn't mean it l'shem Kiddushin, but it is in relation to the concept of gearing up for Kiddushin, and therefore there is a possibility that through this she will become a technically Eishes Ish, and if the Shidduch falls up is cancelled, it would require a get. Usually the references where this is discussed. And in addition, if the Chosin directly places the ring on her finger, then there's also a concept of physical affectionate contact, which is inappropriate until they get married. All right, let's move on. So it's something. What is it? Is it a minhag? It's more than a minhag. This is a concern. It's a halachic concern of the Rebbe. This is very close to a form of Kiddushin, and therefore to avoid doing so. Can give after the wedding, can give also an engagement ring if that's fine. All right. So someone asked me this past week, if you have for some strange reason, tea bags often come in pairs, and you only need one at a time. So now the shaila is, are you allowed to tear them apart? If someone on Shabbos is using a kli shlishi, etc., so the question is, can you tear apart one bag from the other to use one and not have to also use the other or wet it, etc.? So actually, I looked around and I couldn't find any direct. No one discusses this very question or this very common question. I saw something similar in my mind, and that is about cups of yogurt, where you've got sometimes they come in connected 4 or 6, and are you allowed to separate those yogurts from one another so that the kinderlach in the morning, and they shouldn't have to all eat from one pack of yogurts all stuck together? So they should be able to have each one in front of themselves. So here, what you have on the screen is from the Sefer Orchos Shabbos, and I'm going to read what he says. Gevi'ei leben, the cups of yogurt, which are sold in pairs, and before eating, one would normally separate them from one another, where the plastic is scored. Some say that that's not allowed because of Mikva patish, because you are giving finishing touches to these cups, and also mechatech, of cutting something to a specific measurement. And there are those who do permit separating these cups. So the ones who's machmir, he quotes Rav Elyashiv. He sees that the cup is not fully suitable for its function when it's stuck to other cups and when you separate it from all the other cups. So now it becomes more of a completed cup, and that's why it comes to a Mikva patish, in addition to the fact that you're cutting them the specific line, etc. Whereas Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was lenient on this, and he doesn't see an issue of Mikva patish because the cups are finished cups, and they are scored so that they should be able to be separated easily. Therefore, he doesn't see as the cups to be unfinished cups, which is very, very interesting, because Reb Shlomo Zalman, as far as breaking off the lids, with the opening of a bottle, with the breaking off the ring underneath the bottle cap, he was actually very machmir, and here he's taking a lenient view. All right, and he doesn't worry about mechatech because you're not interested a bit more, a bit less. So at any rate, so we have here two opinions about separating cups of yogurt from one another. And I would say it's exactly the same argument here. When you have two bags, each one is a container with a function, and they are shlemos, they're completed. But tearing them apart, then you're able to do manage with one without the other. So myself, I was inclined to the yogurts also. I was very surprised that Reb Shlomo Zalman was mekel. I was more inclined to say that it is forbidden to separate them on Shabbos, and I would take the same view with the tea bags. Actually, that's what I said to the fellow who asked me. But according to Reb Shlomo Zalman, I guess it would be okay. Right, let's move on. Oh, that's 3-4. Right, so someone's asking me whether they're allowed to wear a garment which has a safety pin in place, whether they're allowed to wear it on Shabbos. Now, I'm sure some of you remember the Mishnah in Shabbos, which talks about a man wearing a needle, a machat, and you've got a machat which has a hole, which doesn't have a hole, a needle with an eye, with the outer eye, and it talks about wearing one of those on your garment being an issue of carrying. However, the Mishnah Brura, he's a bit worried about using a pin to hold things in place and to wear the garment in the street on Shabbos. So Rav Chaim Noah, he says this kind of pin is made for wearing. Therefore, this is the way this is the normal use of it, and therefore it's not a problem for Shabbos. It's not so clear here, but this is from the Shmir Shabbos Kelchoso. You have the reference Pei Yud Chesiv Chavtes. So he talks about the list of things which are not a problem for carrying. Sikat bitachon, which is a safety pin to hold two parts of a garment, or something which is holding a tichol, a kippah, etc., that you are allowed to wear them in the street. And in the notes, he refers us to the Bir Halacha, where the Mishnah Brura is concerned about this, and he said, then he echoes the idea of the Sosa Shulchan, that this is not a problem here, because the safety pin is made for holding holding clothing together. It's not used for anything else. It's not comparable to the other needles I mentioned in Shulchan Aruch, which would be used for other purposes and maybe carried for other purposes, and therefore a regular needle or pin in a garment would be considered an issue of carrying, but a safety pin, he concludes that it's not a problem to wear. Okay. So here, next question is from a shliach somewhere has a Chabad house, and they have a kiddush every Shabbos, and at the side of the room they have hot plates. And so here's the question: normally, when we serve food on Shabbos, if we serve the chol, the soup, we take it off the fire, and then we serve. So here's the asking whether the people could serve themselves directly from the kugel or chol, which is sitting on the hot plate. So let's read this. This is from Siman Shin Yud Ches. Ha'ilpo is talking about ha'ilpos v'hakdeira, a pot which has been taken off boiling hot from the fire. If the food is not fully cooked, then you shouldn't use a ladle to take food out, because stirring the food is a form of cooking. If it's fully cooked, you are allowed to stir it once it's off the fire. Others are machmir b'chol inyan, ikar kesvar shoyno. And then he talks about being machmir in stirring, but to ladle out is not a problem. Now, just to clarify, this is not what I'm showing you on the screen here is talking about when it's off the fire, and then ladling out once it's off the fire is not a problem. Here we're talking about whilst it's on the fire, so then it's more close to looking like an act of cooking. I told the shliach, as far as the kugels go, it's okay to serve directly from the kugel as it's sitting on the hot plate, because there's no stirring at all. You're just lifting it out, and therefore that's not a problem. With the cholent, it depends whether it's a dry cholent or is it a lot of gravy, whatever the word is. If there is something being stirred when you pick it up, then other things fall and move around. Then that would be something which one shouldn't do whilst it's still, or shouldn't serve yourself or others whilst it's still on the source of heat because of megas. Let's move on to the next point. So here we have about someone asked the question, one of our listeners asked the question, if you got pieces of text which were torn, and can you put them together in order to read them? So this is an Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch Siman Shin Mem, famous discussion about books which have got words written on the edges of the pages. Are you allowed to open the book on Shabbos? So I know some shuls would have, some synagogues had the names of the shul, the name of the shul stamped on the side of the book. Now that is l'chatchila. Some say you shouldn't open the book on Shabbos, because by opening you are undoing the letters, so you're erasing. When you close the book, you are creating the letters. Even that's not your intention, but it's inevitable. So that's one opinion. The second opinion is that you are allowed to close them because the letters are already there. It's just that they need to be brought closer, and that bringing the pieces together is not called writing. It doesn't require any special actions, and therefore the fact they bring them together is okay. And so V'chein noyagin, he concludes that it is customary to allow to close such a book. So bringing bits together, which are now going to form writing, it's something which is permitted, or perhaps it's something which we look at to stamp the side of a sefer. We don't do that l'chatchila, but if it has been done, you are allowed to bring it together for the same reason. Do a torn piece of text and bring it together. If it's needed, you would be allowed to do so. And that's the first quote. The second quote is from Shmini Shabbos Kol Chosa. So he has here page which is torn, whether it isn't writing or even whether it is writing, it's customary to permit bringing the pieces together to be able to read the text. Okay, we go on to the next point. What was number 7 then? Okay, number 7 was, may a garden parasol be opened on Shabbos? Oh, here it is. It's all right. So let's see what we have. Okay, let's read this carefully. It says here, Geder Godru Gedele Haderes Zal. It's something which the Gedele Haderes, which means is referring to the later poskim in the last 300 years. That one should not open an umbrella on Shabbos or Yom Tov. And even if they were open before, one should not be using an umbrella on Shabbos or Yom Tov, even when there's an Erev. We went through this, if you remember, some of you, about a year and a half ago or more, when it was in COVID, someone wanted to stand outside to join a minyan, and he wanted to know whether he could use an umbrella. So we went through this. At any rate, our Shimshis Gino bought a garden umbrella, which is stuck in the ground, or an awning over a porch. You are allowed to open them or to fold them. So where this comes from is that in the Gemara we talk about if it's connected to a structure, connected to a building, so you are allowed to extend it, and therefore there's differentiating between a portable umbrella that one shouldn't be opening on Shabbos, but if it's connected to the ground, it's fixed where it is, then one would be allowed to open it on Shabbos. So that's, I think, the answer, without going into too much lomdus. The question was also, what if it's partly open? Yes, that also makes it easier, because we have the halacha that if one tefach was already open, then to open it more is permitted. It's just moisif ala oil arai, a temporary covering, and there's already a tefach there, so to add to it is permitted. So someone's asking, what if the umbrella is placed in a weighted thingy to hold it down? Right. I don't know. I'm just going to dodge this one and say that in the current weather, I'm not going to worry about sun parasols for another few months. I'll have to get to it another time. All right, let's move on. So here's a question about women washing Mayim Acharonim. Why do women not wash Mayim Acharonim? So in Siman Kuf Pei Gimel, Kuf Pei Aleph, where the dinim of Mayim Acharonim are discussed. So towards the end of the sif, it says the following: Yes, she'ein noyagin litel. There are those who don't bother with. There are those who have their custom is that they don't wash Mayim Acharonim on a regular basis, because one of the main concerns why Mayim Acharonim was introduced was because of a belach stoimis, a type of salt, and if a person with this salt would go into their eyes, it would be harmful, and that kind of salt is not commonly found in our regions. And as far as the grime, the grease on the hands, also it says we're not worried about that. So I think also this has got to do with when people used to eat with their fingers. At any rate, so there are those communities where Mayim Acharonim wasn't done, wasn't followed. Now, then that doesn't answer about why women would be more lenient than men. So let's read here. So this is one of the specialists for him about halachas for women. So he had written about Mayim Acharonim that generally women don't do it, and he quotes here of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and he says it could be that women who don't wash, they are relying. There's a whole story in the Gemara It says, Mayim Acharonim horgus hanefesh. The whole story in the Gemara about a man who someone he had some valuables at home, and a man came to it. He went out of the house, and another man saw him in the morning, and then he went to the house and said, "Your husband told me to give me the jewelry." And he says, he told me a simon, a way I should know that I'm telling the truth, that he had a very tasty egg this morning. And so the woman gave the visitor the jewelry, trusting that it's all true. And it was, obviously it was a fraud. And how did you know that the egg was tasty? Because the man had a trace of egg on his just over his lips. So when the man came home and he heard that the wife that she had given it away, he murdered his wife. So it says there in the Gemara that Mayim Acharonim horgus hanefesh. So that is the Shlomo Zalman is saying that is more a masculine problem, whereas for women they don't have to worry about this whole scenario. So therefore they don't have to wash Mayim Acharonim. But he says that's not really such a strong explanation, and really where men wash, so in the same communities women should also wash. But that's then he quotes here from Shevet Halevi, Rav Vosner, Mikir Hadin, there's no difference between men and women, but since there is the opinion that we don't worry, nowadays we don't have to worry about Melech Zdoimis, and therefore the men are machmir for themselves, but women we're not makabel this chumrah to wash them. In other words, Mayim Acharonim nowadays is a chumrah, and largely women weren't makabel this chumrah, and therefore that explains the minhag given very from Yekisha families that it wasn't done. Okay. Let's move on. So here we have a question, very common question, that if your hat is out of shape, are you allowed to put it back into shape on Shabbos? Is that a problem of tikkun? So here we have, again, this is from Piskei Teshuvos, from Simshin Beis, which is talking about clothing. That's why it comes up. So he says to make a garment into shape, that would, to just in a regular shape, that would be okay. So therefore, let's say to straighten your collar of your shirt, of your coat, to a pleat on your trousers, perhaps the fold, the cuff, a hat which is bent out of shape, and let's say when you take off your jacket to put it onto a hanger, to put it on all of these things. Now, also, I'm not familiar about this, to put a shtreimel well into its box, even though that enhances it. He says these are not significant changes. This is like very minor things, and therefore it's okay to do them on Shabbos. So that's the answer, that you are allowed to. Right, we have here, the next piece is a little bit more engaging, and that is about, so as you know, we spoke about the new Kitzur Shulchan Aruch with Minhag Chabad, and someone sent me a question why a particular point, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, where the Chabad Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, where the Alter Rebbe is disagrees with, the Pesach of the Alter Rebbe is different to the Pesach of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, so that variation has been recorded, and here in the Kitzur it hasn't been included. So he's questioning this. So let's go through this carefully. So first we have the top, this is Shulchan Aruch, then the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, and then the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. So the story is, I think, a very unusual story. If the Mashliach Tzibur, in other words, the Bal Koire, made a mistake, and he finished off the whole Sedra with 6 aliyahs and said Kaddish. So Shabbos morning meant to have 7 aliyahs, and there were 6 aliyahs, so they finished the Sedra. So you don't have to call up another person, because we're going to use the maftir. The maftir will repeat that which was read for the 6th aliyah, because essentially the maftir really counts as for the 7. So again, really the minimum aliyahs on Shabbos is 7 aliyahs. The maftir is a bonus. And what he's saying here is, if they finish the Seder with 6 aliyahs, so then the maftir will make up the quota of 7 aliyahs, even though Kaddish had been said. So now that's how the Shulchan Aruch writes it. Now the Alter Rebbe in the same place is Simon Pei Beis. If the Chazan, the Balkoyer, made a mistake and he finished the Seder with Shishi, if he says Kaddish, we don't have to call up another person for Shvi besides the Maftir. Rather, the Maftir will repeat that which has been read with the Shishi, and that's enough because the Maftir counts as one of the 7. And I think the point needs to be emphasized, although the Maftir is reading the same material, the same psukim which have been already read, that doesn't matter. It still counts for the 7 aliyahs. And here the Alter Rebbe adds in the brackets. And as we know, the things in the brackets in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch very often are chidushim. So here, this is all if Kaddish had been said. But if Kaddish hadn't been said, Yikra oid shvi milvad hamaftir, then you should call up a 7th one besides the maftir. On a regular week, regular Shabbos, the maftir is extra, more than the 7. So now you want to use the maftir as a 7th. If you haven't said Kaddish yet, which would be a kind of interruption, so if you haven't said Kaddish, so then you should repeat what has been read, part of which has been read, with the 7th man, then say Kaddish, and then call up maftir as usual. All right. So we have now, there's a din of Shulchan Aruch, and the Alter Rebbe picks up, and that depends on whether Kaddish had been said or not. Now let's read down the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Same story. If it was a mistake on Shabbos, they called up the Shishi until the end of the Sedra, don't say Kaddish, just read the Maftir. And the Maftir will be one of the 7. Now, that's very different to what the Alter Rebbe had said, yeah? The Shulchan Aruch had said, if Kaddish had been said, then the Maftir will be the 7th one. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is saying, you haven't said Kaddish, so then repeat, and he will be the 7th aliyah. And then what will you do with Kaddish? So Kaddish will be after Haftorah. So this is very different to what the Alter Rebbe is saying. Because the Alter Rebbe is saying, if you haven't said Kaddish, so call up number 7, and then say Kaddish, and then call up a maftir. So the question was, why was this difference not registered here in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch? And the answer is, Poshet, it was overlooked. And so it does need to be noted. The Alter Rebbe would disagree and say that if Kaddish has not been said, then you should call up the 7th one and just repeat some of those psukim with the 7th, and then Kaddish, and then what is interesting, which it was all news to me, because in the references here in the Shulchan Aruch, in the new edition, they refer to Piskei Dinim of Tzemach Tzedek. He's got a whole column of discussion about this, and also the Tillel David has a discussion. There's a lot of lumdus about this, but I'm not going to discuss that now. Part of the reason is because I didn't manage to absorb it myself. Okay, let's move on. Right. Okay. So I'm in correspondence with a particular shliach who's building a mikveh, Baruch Hashem, and he's also engaging with someone else locally. And he sent me a photograph. I don't know what the photograph is on. No, it's not on the thing. Okay, he sent me a photograph of a pipe, like a gutter of some sort, feeding into a hopper, going to a downpipe. And this water collection unit, otherwise in English a hopper, is made of metal. So the other fellow who he's in contact with says, oh, we have a problem with metal. The Rabbeim didn't like that you should use metal for a mikveh, and therefore he suggests lining it with some kind of fabric. Now, I just want to read what you have on the screen is from the guidelines written by Rabbi Yaakov Lando, who was later the Rav of Bnei Brak, but when the Rebbe Rashab built the mikveh in his home in Rostov, in the last few years of his life, Tofresh Ayin Zayin, Ayin Ches, so Rabbi Yaakov Lando was the local Rav, and although he was still, I believe he was still Bocher at the time. And the Rebbe Rashab told him the exact guidelines how it should be done. So afterwards he wrote down a whole list, and this is published also in the Sefer HaMinhagim. It's also published in the back of Chelik Hey of the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. The first place where it was published was in a volume called Tohoras Mayim from Rav Nissen Telushkin. At any rate, let's just read the text. Hagag derech olav oivim me hagshomim. The roof where the rainwater is traveling, where it's accumulating from. There should not be any blockages, obstacles to the flow of water. There shouldn't be any metal pipes which are blocked. So what's this about? The way I understood this is that it's talking about that you have, if you have a gutter, at the end of the gutter, you have a little wall so that it shouldn't overflow. So that place becomes a container of sorts. There may be the pshat, he may be referring to something else, I'm not sure. But he's clearly talking about where there is where it's closed, which is closed, and therefore it's a container. To use metal gutters and to use metal hoppers where there's no obstacle, no obstruction to the flow of water, as far as I understand, is perfectly okay. What he reads further, that there shouldn't be any, it's preferable that the downpipe from the roof to the mikveh should be straight without any elbows. Now, an elbow, if you think about it, you hold it in a different position, it becomes a container. So try to avoid using elbows. And then he talks about the water traveling over cement, which is absorbent. That's another discussion. So I'm just sharing that with you, that I think that this is a misunderstanding of what the Rebbe Rashab's talking about. He's talking about where the metal is actually an obstruction to the flow of water in some form. Whereas, so actually occasionally I've been involved in a mikveh, the construction, so if there's going to be, let's say, an air conditioner unit outside on the roof, that's going to be a problem, because there are places where it could contain water, and so we try to isolate the air conditioner from where the water is going to accumulate to the mikveh. Let's go on to the next point. So someone's asked me, he sometimes davens in a non-Chabad shul, and as we know, in some circles, they're very generous with the rules of not saying Tachnun. So what's the story about, what happens if they didn't say Tachnun? Should you be saying Tachnun? Now this is, I looked up the letter. So the second paragraph, your second question, which was, if you're davening in a minyan where they're not saying Tachnun, where according to Chabad we would, to do something which is ostentatious, which is obviously different to what the other people are doing. So don't stick out like a sore thumb. Not to be openly different to other people. I understood this to mean that, well, everyone's saying Alein or whatever, you don't put your head down, etc. But afterwards, where the people have left to say Tachnun, it's not bothering anyone. One shouldn't be missing out. But I might have misunderstood this. But that was my understanding. When it's below boilet, where people are seeing, that is when you shouldn't. Otherwise, why should you miss out? All right, we have another couple of minutes, and I have a couple of things which I want to share with you. One is something very interesting. Someone came to me. They have a yurt site. Last year was a leap year, and the person passed away on the 30th of Adoration. So normally, when there is in a regular year, not in a leap year, so whatever date was, whether it was Adoration or Adosheni, that corresponding date in Ador is observed. The problem is that Ador only has 29 days. So there is no Lamed Ador this year. So what do you do for the yard site? So very interesting that the poskim say they should observe a Lamed Shvat, which at first glance seems to be very surprising. But actually, if you think about it, a Lamed Shvat is Aleph Derish Chodesh Adar. And the person had passed away on Aleph Derish. If it was the 30th of Adarishan, it was Aleph Derish Chodesh Adar Sheni. So this is very interesting that the Yortzeit would be observed on Aleph Derish Chodesh Adar, which is Lamed Shvat, and you'd always have this very interesting anomaly where you'd have two children, one born, let's say Chavtes Adar, and his bar mitzvah will be Chavtes Adar, and the other one was born an hour later, was born Lamed Adar Rishon, and his bar mitzvah is going to be Lamed Shvat. So it's going to be interesting, but okay. Right. Let's go one more point which I want to share with you, and that is that there was recently, I saw a news article of a particular place, a shliach somewhere, who had a family celebration, and then they had a picture, a photograph of all the rabbis in the district, all together standing on stage, whatever it was, and the caption of the article was "Unity in such and such place." I remember at any rate, so I was a little bit put out about this, and I just want to share with you what the Rebbe's position about this. Going back in the 50s, there was a great pressure of making boards where there would be representation of conservative, reform, as well as the Orthodox, coming together for various good things. And the Rebbe was very opposed to these meetings, to these bodies of bringing them all together. So I'm just going to read here. This is from a letter. You can see it from Igros Kodesh. In response to a question about my opinion about recent problem which has come up on the agenda for Rabbanim in America, is it permitted for people of Torah observant Jews to participate in organizations which include rabbis representing the movements of reform or conservative, whether as individuals, as in the New York Board of Rabbis, or in organizations as in the Synagogue Council? I don't know the historical details, so I can't tell you more about that. And there are reasons for and against, which have been presented at various opportunities and been in the newspapers. In response to this, the Rebbe says, actually, in recent weeks, this has become more acute, and it's taken on a new facet, that the broader community, and specifically the younger Rabbanim and the Jewish youth in America, are giving a lot of attention to this question. Their perspective is that whatever is going to be the ruling here is not only a question, can you join in this organization or not, but it's a question about the overall attitude to reform and conservative. Question being, are these rabbis, in other words, those who are the flag bearers and the representatives of these movements, are they just Rabbonim Mikilim? Are they like a little bit more lenient rabbis, as distinct from Rabbonim Charedim, who are more, should we say, right-wing, or are they out of the pale altogether? So that's how the Rebbe presents this. It's not just a question of going to a meeting; it's a question of legitimizing or not. And obviously, the Rebbe's involved. The Rebbe's position was very much in opposition to these things. And I remember from Eshver Shalom hearing, I don't remember the details, but I do remember that the Rebbe he encouraged that three very eminent Rabbanim in America, in the New York area, should participate in a particular Agudas HaRabbonim meeting where this was going to be on the agenda. And one of them was Rebbe Moshe Feinstein. I don't remember the other two. And when they said that they don't have means of transportation, so from the Rebbe's office, they said that they'll provide them transportation to upstate New York. And Mashver, I believe, was in the car together with, well, it was Shafran, I don't remember exactly. And the three Rabbanim didn't know of the other ones going out. And in the car they met, and they drove upstate to this to present the position that is unacceptable, that from a Rabbanim should participate in such a forum. The second letter, which you have on the screen, is from Igris Kodesh, volume Yud Gimel, and this is a letter to Rav Zevin, where he says, the Rebbe writes to him that at this moment there are young Rabbanim going out to Yerushalayim, a delegation to try to influence the Rabbanut HaRashit, the chief rabbinate, and specifically Rav Herzog, about the question and the debate which has come up here about whether Shomrei Torah mitzvahs are allowed to participate with organizations which have it says clearly about this, the conservative or reform. And although there had already been a psak, le'isra, decision which was presented by Rabbanim Rosh Hashivas in America, they're still trying to push that this should be acceptable. And some of those pushers are amongst this delegation coming to Yerushalayim. The Rebbe writes to Rav Zevin to try with every effort, not that they shouldn't be supported in their daitom hachizeves, in their misleading view. On the contrary, the Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael should express the very clear position that it's not okay, absolutely. And I can't. All right. So there was also Rabbi David Hollander, who was like from the Young Israel, I believe, that kind of element. He was going to America, to Eretz Yisrael at the same time, and the Rebbe kind of delegates to Rav Hollander to discuss this with Rav Zevin. So that's what we're seeing from the Rebbe, stronger opposition to this. Now, of course, that does not mean you can't be friendly with a local Reform rabbi. What would be the question, though, if you are making a simcha and the Reform rabbi comes to your simcha, do you give him an aliyah? Do you honor him as a rabbi? As a personal friend, that's I don't see a problem with that. We carve everyone. I remember the Rebbe once saying, you have a butcher and he sells meat. We say to the butcher, we love you as a person, we respect you as a person. Your meat, we have a problem, we can't eat your meat. To differentiate between the person and the policy, that's true. But when this idea of a unity, that was we're all happy. It's kind of a message of pluralism, which is very confusing. So listen, everyone can do it. It's a free world, but I just wanted to share with you a perspective. And as Hashem, all of us, wherever we are, should give nachas to the Rebbe and carry out the Rebbe's shlichus b'hatzlocha. And yeah, it's also send with the Rebbe dolamato or hu yugaleno.
Good work, thank you.
Good work. Thank you very much.